After quarter of an hour, Charlotte was reaching her breaking point. She could feel herself increasingly desperately needing the bathroom. The milk that was still making her feel bloated was now filling her bladder. The diaper between her legs was becoming an increasingly attractive proposition as she felt an urgency developing. Charlotte was still trying to work out what she was going to do when her body made her mind up for her. With wide eyes and blushing cheeks, Charlotte felt the diaper around her groin suddenly warming and the pressure in her bladder decreasing. Shaking her head in disbelief, Charlotte tried to tense her muscles and cut the flow of urine but found that she couldn't do it. Why was she wetting with so little control? The warmth slowly spread around the padding even after Charlotte's bladder had finished emptying. A strange tickling warmth spread around the back of the journalist's diaper and she squirmed slightly in the warm and wet underwear. Charlotte had no idea how long she had to lay there with the heavy diaper pressing against her skin, but it felt like it was at least an hour. She grew increasingly frustrated at being trapped in such a state and angry that she was forced to lay in her own urine like this. With nothing else to occupy her mind, Charlotte thought back to the video that had played earlier. It had talked about childless couples and people volunteering to help them. Charlotte thought about the diaper and the nursery and slowly started putting two and two together. She was going to be sent to a couple to be a baby. Charlotte pulled at the restraints again in desperation. She could feel her heart hammering, but she knew she had to keep her cool. If she got a chance to escape, she had to be ready to take it. Getting emotional wouldn't help. It wasn't easy to hold back the panic tears though. The door to the nursery opened again and Charlotte turned her head to see Nanny walking across the room in that same slow and deliberate style. Charlotte was trembling slightly as she tried to keep a lid on the impossible combination of thoughts and feelings that were running through her head. The nanny walked up to the side of the crib and looked down. "Are you going to be a good girl?" Nanny asked for the third time. Charlotte paused as her brain fought her heart for the answer to give. Her brain told her that she had to get out of this crib, and that meant responding positively to the question. Her heart told her to resist. "Are you going to be a good girl?" Nanny repeated yet again. Charlotte closed her eyes and sighed before nodding in a defeated fashion. She felt a tear fall down the side of her face as the nanny leaned in and took the gag away. Charlotte was grateful to regain her limbs as well when the leather restraints were removed. For the first time in hours she could move. The nanny lifted Charlotte out of the crib and over to the changing table. Charlotte could feel the strong arms of the robot wrapped around her. It was almost like being in a harness as Charlotte was unable to push herself away from Nanny's chest. She felt defeated, like her resistance to this machine was useless. It had already made her wet herself and it was entirely in control of her. Charlotte knew the situation was totally out of her control and she was very scared at where this was all going. "Be a good girl and you won't be restrained," Nanny said as she laid Charlotte down on the changing table. Charlotte's body wanted to run, but she made herself lay still as the robot pulled the snaps of her pink onesie apart. The material that was tightly stretched over the woman's body sprung up to reveal the wet diaper underneath. "Who's a wet little girl?" Nanny said the sort of things you would say to a baby as you change their diaper, and yet she didn't say it in the high-pitched sing-song voice you would expect. It was the same emotionless voice that sent chills down Charlotte's spine. Charlotte could feel herself turning red as she felt the spongy padding pushed against her body by the robot who was apparently checking the diaper's condition. Charlotte wondered what purpose there was for this other than humiliation. It was obvious the diaper was wet. It wasn't like she had much choice as she was tied down in the crib for so long. Charlotte laid her head back and closed her eyes as the robot's hands moved up the smooth plastic and pulled the tapes off the front of the diaper. She felt like the nanny was taking a deliberately long time to do this. Was embarrassment part of the process? The front of the diaper was lowered and cold air made Charlotte jump as the warm confines were pulled away from her crotch. The room's normal temperature felt a little chilly after sitting in her warm urine for as long as she had. "Hey! Careful," Charlotte exclaimed when Nanny had suddenly begun wiping her private areas with some very cold wet wipes. Charlotte felt the used diaper pulled away and was saddened, though not surprised, when she watched the robotic caretaker begin to unfold a new diaper. She wanted to fight but remembered that the only thing that would get her was more time restrained, and if she wanted to get away from this place she couldn't be tied down. The new diaper was slipped underneath Charlotte's butt and the front pulled up between her legs. The soft and fluffy disposable underwear gently brushed Charlotte as it was pulled up snugly and taped closed. The process that made Charlotte blush so much was completed when the onesie was snapped closed again. The diaper was pushed up against her body by the stretchy material and made it impossible for her to forget what she was wearing. The nanny lifted Charlotte down from the table and placed her on the floor. Charlotte wobbled slightly and used the changing table to balance herself. Her legs hadn't been kneaded or used in a long while and they felt a little weak as she put her weight on them. "Play nice until lunchtime," Nanny ordered. "Wait," Charlotte half-shouted as the robot began marching towards the exit. "Listen, I don't know who you guys are or anything about you. Just let me go and I promise that I won't tell anyone what's going on here." The robot looked at Charlotte for another few seconds before turning towards the doorway again. It seemed entirely unmoved by Charlotte's rather panicky plea. "Wait," Charlotte shouted again. This time the panic she felt was mirrored by her voice. "People will know I'm missing. Let me go or..." Charlotte had been watching Nanny slowly advance towards her. She thought maybe she was finally persuading her captors to release her. She was shocked when the robot bent down and placed a small latex pacifier into her mouth. "Little girls should be seen and not heard," Nanny said as it turned again towards the door. Charlotte watched the machine turn and leave the room in shock. The door swung closed behind Nanny and the sound of a heavy bolt locked the room behind it. Charlotte looked to the floor next to her and viciously spat out the soother that she had been given. "Bitch," Charlotte muttered darkly.